You open a declassified folder and read the first line: the Joint Chiefs want to blow up a U.S. passenger plane and blame Cuba. The date is 1962. How far would they go to start a war? You stand inside the tense corridors of Washington during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Soviet warheads sit 90 miles from Florida. The military sees invasion as inevitable. Chairman Lyman Lemnitzer gathers every service chief. They sign a memo titled Northwoods. Every signature is real. The plan calls for staged terror on American soil. One proposal: hijack or sabotage civilian airliners, then release fabricated evidence pointing to Havana. Another: sink a boat of Cuban refugees and claim Castro did it. You pause. These are official recommendations. The memo even suggests blowing up the Guantanamo base and blaming Cuban forces. Casualties among U.S. personnel are listed as acceptable. Then you reach the final page. President Kennedy reads the same pages weeks later. He rejects every option. The operation stays buried until the files surface decades afterward. What else remains hidden? You trace the chain of command. Every uniformed leader endorsed the false flag concept. Only civilian oversight stopped it. The line between defense and provocation suddenly feels thin. The Cuban Missile Crisis ends without invasion. Northwoods is quietly shelved. Yet the signatures prove the idea was treated as routine planning. How close did the country come? You close the folder. The document is real, the plot never executed, and the question lingers: what other memos were written, signed, and stopped only at the last desk? You trace the memo's path back through the Pentagon. Every signature belongs to a sitting Joint Chief. Lemnitzer's name leads them all. The plan reached the Secretary of Defense's desk already approved at the highest military level. Why was the entire command structure willing to sign? The document stayed inside a locked safe for decades. Only a handful of aides ever saw the full text. No leaks reached Congress or the press. How did a proposal this explosive remain invisible until the 1990s? You open the next folder. A separate annex lists specific U.S. cities and dates for simulated attacks. The language treats civilian casualties as acceptable variables. What other annexes were drafted and then filed away? The Assassination Records Review Board requests the file in 1997. A single researcher finds the Northwoods papers among unrelated Cuba records. No one had flagged them before. How many similar plans still sit unmarked in other boxes? Kennedy's rejection arrives in a short handwritten note. The proposal is returned without comment or countersignature. The Joint Chiefs receive it back and simply stop talking about it. Did they expect a different answer the next time? You compare the signatures to other 1962 planning papers. Northwoods matches the format used for routine contingency studies. Nothing marks it as unusual inside the system. How many other routine studies crossed the same desks that year? The memo never leaves the building. No copy reaches the White House staff or State Department. It remains a purely military document until the day it is declassified. What kept it from ever becoming policy outside the chief's conference room? You reach the final page. A cover note reads, "For planning purposes only." The phrase appears on dozens of other never-executed studies. The distinction feels thin once you have read the details. Where does planning end and decision begin? The folder closes again. Every name on those pages held real authority in 1962. The signatures are not forgeries. They are the official record. How many other folders like this one have you not yet opened? You open the next folder. The first proposal calls for sinking a boatload of Cuban refugees and blaming Havana. The memo lists exact casualty numbers. You trace the chain of command upward. Every signature belongs to a 4-star officer still in uniform today. What if one more signature had reached the Oval Office? The next page outlines hijacking a civilian airliner. American passengers would be replaced by agents before the plane is blown up over Cuba. You read the line twice. The document dates the operation for October 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis is already underway. How close did this plan come to launch? Another section proposes attacking the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo. American soldiers would be killed by supposed Cuban infiltrators. The memo even suggests faking funerals for the dead. You notice the date stamp, March 1962. Kennedy has not yet rejected anything. Who approved the typing of these orders? You reach the section on blowing up an empty American passenger plane. The aircraft would be remotely controlled and detonated near Cuban airspace. The document lists which news outlets would receive the planted evidence. The plan is signed by the entire Joint Chiefs. What happens when every safeguard says yes? The memos grow more elaborate. One plan stages bombings in Miami and Washington, then attributes them to Cuban agents. The target list includes specific streets and government buildings. You check the final page for any note of hesitation. There is none. The paper feels heavier in your hands. A separate appendix details how to fake the sinking of the USS Maine again, this time with modern explosives. The goal is identical to 1898, public outrage aimed at Cuba. You set the page down. Every element has been rehearsed on paper. The only missing step is presidential approval. You reach the final endorsement page. All 5 Joint Chiefs have signed. The document sits in the chairman's outbox for transmission to the Secretary of Defense. No one has written approved. Yet nothing inside the folder says rejected. The folder ends here. What changed between this signature and Kennedy's refusal? The next folder you open is empty. Only a routing slip remains. It reads, Return to Originator, April 5, 1962. The date falls 2 weeks after Kennedy received the full package. You close the empty folder. The operation never left the building. But the signatures stayed on record. You ask yourself how many similar folders were opened and closed in the same month. The Cuban Missile Crisis is peaking. Invasion plans sit beside these false flag proposals. One man's single refusal kept the documents from becoming orders. How many other single refusals have you never seen? You traced the routing slip to the White House. Kennedy's national security team reviewed every page. No approval stamp appears. Instead, handwritten notes question the necessity of staging American deaths. The folder returns to the Pentagon marked for archiving. The signatures of every Joint Chief remain inside. The memos never became orders. No planes exploded. No refugee boats were sunk. Yet the proposals sat on desks while invasion plans for Cuba were updated daily. You hold the declassified pages and realize the plan stopped only because one civilian refused to sign. 13 years later the same folder is pulled again. This time it travels to the Church Committee. Senators read the same false flag scenarios. They release nothing. The public stays unaware for another 20 years. You wonder what else still sits in locked drawers. In 1997 the documents finally reached the National Archives. The signatures of Lemnitzer, Anderson, and the others are now public. No conspiracy theory was needed. The plan itself was written by the highest military officers and rejected by the president. You compare the Northwoods memos to the actual Cuban Missile Crisis files. Real Soviet missiles arrived weeks later. Kennedy chose blockade over invasion. The false flag proposals stayed classified while the world stood at the brink of nuclear war. The operation's authors retired without scandal. Lemnitzer became NATO's supreme commander. No one faced charges for suggesting American citizens be killed as pretext. The signatures simply gathered dust until historians opened the boxes. You closed the final folder. The empty routing slip from April 1962 stares back. Kennedy's refusal is the only reason the plan never moved forward. Yet the structure that produced it remained untouched. How many other folders, signed by every service chief, were returned to their originators and never seen again?